Japan has some of the longest working hours in the world. Nearly a quarter of Japanese companies have their employees work more than 80 hours of overtime per month. Those extra hours are often unpaid. Today, Japan's corporate culture is driven by the so-called salaryman. The salaryman is defined by his loyalty to his company and expected to spend his entire career working for the same firm. The nation's work ethic dates back to what's referred to as Japan's economic miracle, which was its dramatic economic growth beginning in the 1950s, which propelled it to become the world's second largest economy. Inside Japan's corporations, the culture emphasizes the success of a company as a whole to be more important than any single individual, which might explain why one study found that 63% of Japanese felt guilty for taking paid leave. Japan's government has considered several initiatives to curb the number of hours spent at the office, including making it mandatory to take at least 5 vacation days a year and requiring a rest period between the end of one day and the start of another.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to EnglishPod. I'm Sophia.
And I'm Andy. Thanks for joining us today for another fascinating episode.
Today we're exploring a thought-provoking topic about Japan's corporate culture and work ethic. Did you know that Japan has some of the longest working hours in the world?
That's right, Sophia. Nearly a quarter of Japanese companies require employees to work more than 80 hours of overtime each month. And here's the kicker, those extra hours are often unpaid.
It's a challenging reality, and it's rooted in a deep cultural tradition. In today's episode, we'll discuss the history and evolution of this culture, learn some key vocabulary, and share practical tips to improve your English skills while discussing this fascinating topic.
So grab your notebook and let's get started.
Before we dive deeper into today's topic, let's take some time to review a few key terms and phrases that will help everyone follow the discussion more smoothly.
Great idea, Sophia. Understanding these terms can really enhance fluency and make the conversation more engaging.
Let's start with corporate culture. It refers to the shared values, beliefs, and practices that define how a company operates and interacts, both internally and externally.
Well, that's such an important concept. For example, Japan's corporate culture is well known for prioritizing loyalty and teamwork over individual success, which is quite different from some Western countries.
Absolutely. And speaking of long work hours, let's talk about overtime.
Sure. Overtime means working extra hours beyond the standard work schedule.
It's so common in Japan that many employees work unpaid overtime as a way to show their dedication to the company.
That ties into another term, salaryman. It's a Japanese term used to describe a male office worker who is incredibly loyal to his company and works long hours, often for decades.
Right. The salaryman is practically a symbol of Japan's traditional corporate values.
Those values also stem from Japan's economic miracle, a period of dramatic economic growth starting in the 1950s. It transformed the country into a global economic powerhouse.
That's true, and it also influenced the modern work ethic we see in Japan today. But despite these achievements, not everything has been smooth. Let's discuss paid leave.
Paid leave refers to time off work where employees still receive their salary. But in Japan, many workers feel guilty about taking it, even though it's their legal right.
That's a challenge, isn't it? It's why there's been a push for new initiatives to address overwork.
An initiative is essentially a new plan or strategy designed to tackle a specific problem. For instance, Japan's government has mandated vacation days to encourage people to take breaks.
These efforts aim to improve work-life balance, which refers to finding equilibrium between professional responsibilities and personal life.
Achieving that balance, however, remains a challenge in Japan's demanding corporate environment. It's why concepts like rest period are so vital.
A rest period ensures employees have enough time to recharge between the end of one workday and the start of the next.
That helps prevent burnout, which is the state of physical and emotional exhaustion caused by prolonged stress or overwork.
Exactly. Many Japanese workers struggle with burnout due to excessive hours and high expectations. But the problem goes beyond that. Let's talk about guilt.
Guilt can be a huge factor. It's that feeling of remorse or regret. And many employees experience it when they take time off, even for vacations.
True, and that brings us to initiative fatigue, which describes the weariness people feel after repeated efforts to implement changes that don't seem effective.
That's a real concern in Japan. Despite government efforts to reduce overwork, some initiatives haven't had the desired impact.
Which means the conversation around these issues needs to continue. Understanding these terms is the first step toward a deeper discussion.
Well said, Sophia. With this vocabulary in mind, we're ready to dive into today's topic. Let's get started.
Andy, I recently came across some fascinating insights about Japan's work culture. It's a topic that really highlights the challenges and traditions of their corporate environment.
Absolutely, Sophia. Japan's corporate culture is so unique and deeply rooted in history. Are you talking about the long working hours and the role of the salaryman?
That's right. Did you know that nearly a quarter of Japanese companies have their employees working over 80 hours of overtime per month? And most of those extra hours are unpaid.
Education and perhaps the pressure that comes with working in such a structured corporate culture.
Exactly. This dedication is embodied by the salaryman, who's defined by his loyalty to the company and often spends his entire career at one firm.
It's fascinating how that mindset ties back to Japan's economic miracle. That was a period of rapid economic growth starting in the 1950s, which turned Japan into a global economic powerhouse.
And even now, that history influences the workplace. Japanese companies focus on the success of the team rather than individual achievements. But this approach has its downsides, like employees feeling guilty for taking paid leave, 63% of them, according to one study.
That's a huge number. It sounds like a cultural expectation rather than just a workplace rule. But I know the Japanese government has been trying to address overwork with initiatives like mandatory vacation days and enforced rest periods.
Exactly. They're working on balancing tradition with the need for better work-life balance.
It's such an important topic, and I'm sure our listeners will find it as insightful as we do.
Let's listen to an audio segment that breaks this down even further. It covers Japan's work culture, the roots of the salaryman, and the government's efforts to improve the situation. Stay tuned.
Japan has some of the longest working hours in the world. Nearly a quarter of Japanese companies have their employees work more than 80 hours of overtime per month. Those extra hours are often unpaid. Today, Japan's corporate culture is driven by the so-called salaryman. The salaryman is defined by his loyalty to his company and expected to spend his entire career working for the same firm. The nation's work ethic dates back to what's referred to as Japan's economic miracle, which was its dramatic economic growth beginning in the 1950s, which propelled it to become the world's second largest economy. Inside Japan's corporations, the culture emphasizes the success of a company as a whole to be more important than any single individual, which might explain why one study found that 63% of Japanese felt guilty for taking paid leave. Japan's government has considered several initiatives to curb the number of hours spent at the office, including making it mandatory to take at least 5 vacation days a year and requiring a rest period between the end of one day and the start of another.
Now it's time for our Fluency Speaking Developer segment, where we help you use today's vocabulary and phrases naturally in conversation.
Let's start with corporate culture. Instead of saying the company has its own way of doing things, try this.
The corporate culture here emphasizes innovation and teamwork, which makes it a great place to work.
Doesn't that sound more professional and polished?
It does. Now, for overtime, instead of saying, I work extra hours, you could say,
I've been putting in a lot of overtime this month to meet project deadlines.
much more dynamic. Next, let's try salaryman. Instead of saying he's a dedicated employee, say,
As a salaryman, he's known for his unwavering commitment to the company and his long working hours.
perfect. Moving on to economic miracle. Instead of saying Japan grew quickly after the war, try this.
Japan's economic miracle transformed it into one of the world's leading economies in just a few decades.
That adds so much depth. Now for paid leave. Instead of saying, I took some time off, say,
I decided to use my paid leave to recharge and spend time with my family.
here's one for work-life balance. Instead of saying, I need to focus on work and personal time, try this.
Achieving work-life balance has helped me feel more productive and less stressed.
Such an important phrase. Now let's practice burnout. Instead of saying, I'm too tired from work, say,
After months of constant overtime, I started experiencing burnout and knew I needed a break.
that's a powerful way to express it. Moving on to teamwork. Instead of saying, we worked together on this, say,
Strong teamwork was the key to completing the project on time and exceeding expectations.
how about mandatory? Instead of saying, it's required by law, try this.
The company has made it mandatory for employees to take at least 5 vacation days per year.
And finally, for initiative fatigue. Instead of saying people are tired of new ideas, try this.
The constant introduction of reforms has led to initiative fatigue among employees who feel that changes are ineffective.
These subtle changes make your speech more polished and professional.
Practice these phrases and you'll be using them confidently in no time. Let's listen to a dialogue between two new characters, Yuki and Kenji, as they discuss their experiences with Japan's work culture.
Kenji, I couldn't help but notice you've been working late almost every single day this month. How are you holding up?
Honestly, Yuki, I am exhausted, but I feel like I can't slow down. Our company values teamwork so much, and I don't want to let anyone down.
I understand the importance of teamwork, but don't you think there's a limit? Overworking yourself won't help in the long run. It can lead to burnout, and then you won't be able to help the team at all.
That's a good point, but it's hard to step away. Everyone else around me is working just as hard or harder. If I start taking breaks, won't it look like I'm not as committed?
Kenji, it's not about appearances or outworking everyone else. It's about sustainability. If you keep pushing yourself without rest, you'll hit a wall. Taking a break doesn't mean you're not dedicated. It means you're smart enough to manage your energy.
That's easier said than done. Honestly, I feel a little guilty even thinking about taking time off. It's like I'm letting the team down by not pulling my weight.
I get it. Japanese corporate culture really ingrains that sense of loyalty and obligation in us. But think about it this way. When you're well rested, you're sharper, more creative, and more productive. Isn't that better for the team in the long run?
I guess so, but it's still hard to break the habit. The guilt lingers, you know?
I know the feeling. I struggled with it too. But I realized that the company's success doesn't rest on one person alone. It's a collective effort. And part of being a good team member is taking care of yourself so you can contribute your best.
That's a great perspective. Maybe I should start small. I have some paid leave accumulated. I could take a day off and see how it feels.
That's a great idea. You don't have to make a huge change overnight. Even one day off can make a difference. When I started taking one day off every few months, it completely changed my outlook.
Really? How did it help?
Well, for one, I felt more refreshed and less stressed. I used that time to recharge, reading, going for walks, spending time with friends. And when I came back to work, I noticed I was much more focused and efficient.
That sounds amazing. I can't even remember the last time I spent a day doing something for myself.
Exactly. You deserve it, Kenji. Think of it as an investment in yourself and your career. If you're happier and healthier, your work will naturally reflect that.
You're right. I think I'll talk to my manager about scheduling a day off. It's time I prioritize my well-being.
That's the spirit. And hey, if you need ideas on how to spend your day off, let me know. I have plenty of recommendations.
Thanks, Yuki. I really appreciate you looking out for me. It's nice to have a friend who gets it.
Anytime, Kenji. Remember, balance is key. We're in this together, and supporting each other is what teamwork is all about.
This dialogue highlights the struggles and small victories of changing attitudes toward work-life balance in Japan.
It's also a great way to practice using today's vocabulary in context. Try writing your own dialogues about work culture or related topics.
To wrap up, let's share some tips for using this episode to improve your English.
First, practice shadowing. Listen to phrases like corporate culture or work-life balance and repeat them aloud, mimicking the intonation and rhythm.
Second, create sentences with today's vocabulary. For example, Japan's corporate culture values teamwork over individual achievements.
And don't forget to discuss these topics with a friend or language partner. Talking about real-world issues helps you build fluency and confidence.
You can also record yourself summarizing this episode and play it back to identify areas for improvement.
That's all for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed learning about Japan's corporate culture and gained some valuable English skills along the way.
If you have questions or want to share your thoughts, leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for tuning into English Insights. Until next time, take care.
Goodbye, everyone.